Story 1. The Bell in the Wheat Field. I remember the drive more than I should. A slow two-lane stretch through the back roads of Wiltshire, the hedgerows pressing tight, like the land didn't much care for visitors. My radio had cut out 30 minutes earlier, just static, even on local frequencies, so I drove in silence. No cars past me, no people on the road, just the sound of tires brushing loose gravel and the occasional crow shifting on a fence post. The farmhouse was set back from the road, crouched behind a curtain of wheat fields that stretched further than I could see. The stalks had grown tall, too early for harvest, waving slightly under a heavy sky. I remember wondering if that was normal for June. It didn't feel like summer. The air was damp and still, like the aftermath of something unspoken. I parked just past a crooked sign, nailed to a post, Wickham Farm. The lettering was nearly illegible. Mrs. Wickham met me at the front door. Late 60s, maybe older. Gray cardigan. One eye slightly lazier than the other. She didn't speak much. Handed me a ring of tarnished keys and pointed to the second floor. You'll stay in the room with the slanted ceiling. Best light in the morning, she said. I nodded. She didn't follow me in. The house smelled of old paper and soot, the kind of scent you expect in antique shops or in used attics. Floorboards creaked with memory. Wallpaper peeled in corners where water had once run in thin lines. A fireplace in every room, though none were lit. I didn't unpack much. Just enough to get through the week. Survey the structure, make notes on the roofing, and send in a report. Restoration work had been my niche. Not rebuilding, just assessing what could be salvaged. And this house, despite its wear, still stood proud. That meant something. It wasn't until the second night that I heard it. Faint at first. I'd been lying on the bed, half reading an article I'd already forgotten. No wind outside. Just silence and the soft click of the pull-chain lamp above me. Then a low, deliberate toll, like a church bell, but further away. Distant enough to question. Not loud, not alarming. Just there. A single note, round and cold. I looked up, more out of confusion than fear. Listened for it again. Nothing. The next morning I asked Mrs. Wickham, casual-like, if there were any old churches nearby. She shook her head. The nearest one's 12 miles east. St. Michael's. You won't hear from here. I left it at that. The third night, the bell came again. Same time. I checked the bedside clock. 3:11 a.m. Same deep metallic tone. No echo. No reverb. Just a sound that didn't belong. I sat up and pressed my palms to the window. The wheat field beyond the house lay still. Too still. Not a single stalk moving. Not even a breeze. I told myself it might be a cowbell, a gate, some rusted farm equipment shifting with the night. Logical. But it didn't sit right. The house was too old. Too quiet. Too intent on listening. That morning, I explored the attic. Not for any reason, really. The stairs up were hidden behind a door in the hallway, narrow and steep. The kind of stairs that creaked no matter how careful you were. I carried a flashlight, even though daylight filtered in through a sliver between warped boards in the roof. The attic was filled with the usual forgotten things, dusty trunks, boxes of brittle books, faded photographs. But at the far end, stacked beneath a tarp, I found blueprints. Architectural drawings, wide, yellowing pages rolled in tubes, labeled Wickham Estate. Proposed renovation, 1864. Most of the designs matched the house I was in. Fireplace placement, ceiling beams, the peculiar layout of the kitchen. But one thing didn't belong. There, on the last sheet, was a bell tower, a tall, narrow spire intended to rise from the west side of the house. I'd walked the perimeter myself. There was no tower, no foundation for one, nothing. Yet here it was, rendered in exquisite detail, measurements and notes intact, signed off but never built. Something about that lingered with me the rest of the day. I couldn't explain why it unnerved me. Unfinished projects aren't uncommon, especially in buildings this old. But the image stayed in my head like a splinter under the nail. That night, I stayed awake. I sat at the desk in the corner of the slanted room. Tape recorder at the ready, its red light glowing in the dark. I told myself I'd capture it. The bell, prove it was real, mechanical, explainable. At exactly 3:11, it came again. This time it sounded closer. It rang once, deep and slow, then silence. I froze, didn't breathe. The recorder continued to blink, but no sound moved through the room. I played it back immediately. Just static. No bell, no shift in air pressure. Nothing but a faint buzz. My chest felt tight, like something unseen had moved past me, but without form. I checked the hallway. Empty. The walls hummed with old wiring and silence. Every door closed exactly as I'd left it. The next morning, I tried not to speak of it, but Mrs. Whitcomb caught me staring out the kitchen window, eyes on the wheat fields. "You should leave it as it is," she said. Her voice was even. "Some things aren't meant to be restored." I didn't ask what she meant. That evening, the fields were moving. No wind, just movement, like a hand dragging along the tops of the stalks in a long, deliberate path. I turned away before I saw where it led. I kept to my work the next day. It helped, in a way, to focus on measurements, angles, the structural logic of things. The west-facing wall, where the bell tower was meant to be, had no unusual features, no signs of construction or removal, just stone, aged and steady, whether by time but intact. I took photographs, not for any report, just to convince myself the blueprints were a dead end, a curiosity, nothing more. Back inside, I found myself avoiding the attic. It wasn't deliberate at first. I simply had no reason to return. But when I passed a narrow stairwell, I noticed the air felt colder. Still air, thick with dust, yet it carried something beneath it, like the faint scent of brass or the memory of something burnt long ago. I paused with my hand on the door, then stepped back, left it alone. By early evening, the house had darkened. The skies outside stayed gray, though the forecast had promised sun. Light never really lasted here, not the warm kind. Anyway, I sat on the back porch with tea that had gone cold, watching the wheat bend in odd directions. Not wildly, not all at once, just in slow, unnatural pockets. The sort of movement that doesn't follow wind or rhythm, but intention. That night, I left the recorder running again. I didn't expect much. I wasn't even sure what I wanted anymore. Proof? Explanation? Maybe just reassurance that I wasn't the only one hearing it. The recorder blinked on the desk. I sat on the bed and waited. At 3:11, the bell came. One toll. But this time there was something else, faint, almost imperceptible. After the bell faded, I thought I heard footsteps. Not inside. Outside, crunching lightly through the wheat. Measured, not hurried, one at a time. I stood up slowly, crossed to the window. I couldn't see anything, just the swaying stalks, parting here and there in lines that didn't match the breeze. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, I played back the tape. Static again. No bell, no footsteps, just a low mechanical hum, as if the house itself had swallowed the sound before it reached the mic. Downstairs, I found Mrs. Whitcomb tending to something in the sink. She didn't look up. "There's something in the fields," I said. She dried her hands on a towel. "They've always moved strange." "That bell." "I don't hear anything," she said. Too quickly. I let it drop. Later that day, I returned to the attic. This time, I brought gloves. I sorted through every drawing, every brittle page. Some labeled modifications, others unapproved. A few notes scrawled in the margins caught my eye, mentions of acoustic weight and ceremonial clearance. Not typical for rural architecture. One sheet, nearly torn in half, showed the bell tower in cross-section, but instead of an interior ladder or stairs, it had nothing, just a long, narrow shaft descending straight into darkness. No bell inside. No housing for one. Just space. I couldn't explain why that bothered me more than anything else. I took the page downstairs and laid it out on the kitchen table. What was this tower for? I asked. Mrs. Whitcomb didn't answer at first. She poured herself a cup of tea, added no milk, and took a long sip. "It was never built," she finally said. "I know, but why was it designed that way? No access, no mechanism." She studied the paper for a long moment. My grandfather said his father drew those, she said. He was never right afterward. What happened? She folded the page carefully, returned it to my hands, and walked away. That evening, I took a walk through the wheat. It felt like the sort of thing a sane person would do. Confront the landscape, test the boundaries. The sun had dipped behind a low ceiling of clouds, casting everything in a dull, sour light. The fields brushed against my sides as I moved, thick with a smell I hadn't noticed before, something like mold and copper. I kept track of my path by counting fence posts behind me. 10 in, 15, the house still visible, though blurred behind the shifting stalks. At the 20th post, I paused. The field was utterly silent. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own breath. And then something else. Not movement, not footsteps, breathing, not mine. It was shallow, rhythmic, coming from somewhere low to the ground, maybe a few feet away. I turned. Nothing there. No shapes, no animals. The wheat stood tall and unmoved. I stepped back. The breathing stopped. By the time I reached the porch, my hands were shaking. I didn't tell her I couldn't. She sat by the fire, knitting something, the radio low and tuned to static. I listened with her, said nothing. That night, the bell did not ring. Instead, I woke at 3:11 with no sound at all, just the certainty that I'd been awakened by something. I sat up in the dark, listened, waited. Then I noticed the clock. The second hand was still, frozen, but the light from the recorder still blinked. I checked my phone. No signal. No time. The screen lit, then dimmed, then returned to the home screen, blank and without apps. I got up and tried the hallway light. It flickered, then died. Only the blinking red of the recorder stayed constant. I sat in the dark until morning. When light finally broke through, I walked to the window. The wheat outside had been pressed flat, not randomly, but in a circle neat and precise. I didn't eat that day. Didn't speak. I just kept thinking about the tower that was never built, about why someone had designed it with nothing inside, why someone would want to make a hollow space, pointing skyward, that led nowhere, and why it still echoed. By the 5th day, I wasn't sleeping, not in the proper sense. I'd drift for short moments, wake without knowing why, and sit in the dark for hours. The air inside the house had changed. It had weight to it now, not smell or temperature, just pressure, like being underground, even when standing at the window. I stopped ringing up the bell. Mrs. Whitcomb had grown quiet. She rarely left the chair by the hearth anymore. Her knitting was abandoned. Once, I caught her staring out across the fields, unmoving, lips slightly parted. When I cleared my throat, she didn't blink. That morning, I found something strange on the back steps. A length of old rope, not frayed, not modern, the sort used in church bells, thick and stained, coiled neatly, as if placed there deliberately. I hadn't seen it the night before. It hadn't rained, and yet it was damp. The fibers smelled faintly of rust. I left it untouched. Later, I tried to work. I set up my tripod near the west wall, the supposed location of the unbuilt bell tower. The stones looked ordinary, but my measurements didn't align. The internal dimensions of the house were subtly off, not enough to notice with the eye, but enough to matter. Rooms were smaller inside than they should have been. Angles didn't behave. The west side seemed to absorb space without explanation. When I held the blueprint beside the wall, something struck me. There was room for a shaft, narrow, hidden between joists. It wouldn't need much space if it didn't lead anywhere, or if it wasn't meant to. I ran my palm along the stone, smooth, solid, and yet I could swear I heard something on the other side. Not voices, just movement, like rope shifting dry against wood. I backed away without finishing my notes. That evening, I walked the perimeter of the house again. I needed air, needed to remind myself the outside still existed. The wheat was still flattened in the same circular shape, untouched by wind or time. I stood at the edge and watched. The pattern hadn't spread. It hadn't vanished. It simply waited. From the far side, something stirred. I didn't see anything. I didn't expect to. But the wheat moved, slowly, steadily, forming a line that curved toward me. Not random, not wind. I turned back, walked quickly to the door, and didn't look behind me. The next night, the recorder didn't blink. I changed the batteries. Nothing. The power still worked, but certain lights no longer turned on. The hallway bulb buzzed and died as soon as I flipped the switch. My phone refused to hold a charge. The clock by the bed was stuck again, still at 3:11. I tried turning the hands. They resisted. At some point in the night, I gave up waiting. I put on my boots, took the flashlight, and stepped outside. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe clarity. Maybe the bell again. It was cool out. The wheat shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Still, silent, I stepped off the path and into the field. The stalks brushed against my arms, brittle and dry, though the soil beneath was damp. Each footstep made a soft crunch, like stepping on shed skin. I counted again, not fence posts this time, but paces. I told myself I'd stop at 50. I didn't. At what must have been 100 steps in, I reached the circle. The same perfect shape. Press flat. I stood at its edge, looking down. There was no scorch mark, no debris, just wheat, laid as if something had moved outward from the center. Then I saw it. In the middle of the circle, barely visible in the moonlight, stood a single post. Old wood, maybe part of fence long ago. Attached to it, another rope, the same kind I'd found earlier, hanging loose but pulled taut at the end, as if something had once hung from it. I stepped closer. The rope didn't move. No wind, no sound. I reached for it, not to touch, just to see if it swayed. It stayed still, perfectly still. Behind me, the wheat moved again. Not everywhere, just directly behind. One clean path, parting outward. I turned and saw nothing. But I knew I wasn't alone. I backed away, step by step. Whatever had moved the field didn't follow. Not yet. The bell never rang that night. It didn't need to. The next morning, I told Mrs. Wickham I would leave. She didn't respond. Just sat there, eyes on the floor. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but closed again. I packed quickly. Didn't bother with photos or notes. Left the blueprints where I'd found them. Just before locking the front door, I turned once more toward the west wall. There, in the corner of the ceiling near the hearth, was something I hadn't noticed before. A rope, thin, newer than the one outside. It hung from a wooden beam, frayed at the end, as if it had been cut. No ladder nearby. No explanation. I stared at it for a long time. Then I left. That was 12 years ago. I never submitted a report. Never spoke to anyone about it until now. I don't know if the house still stands. I haven't returned. But some nights, just after 3, I wake with the sense that something had been calling. Not loudly, just once. Low, deliberate, and waiting. Story 2, the second key. I arrived just after noon, though you'd never know it from the light. The sky over Caithness had that familiar North Sea dullness, the kind that feels like dusk, even when it isn't. The cottage sat at the edge of a rocky bluff, tucked low behind a curve of wind-bent grass. It looked like the picture from a newspaper ad, though something about the angle felt different. Smaller, leaning slightly, as if bracing itself against the sea. The key came in the post a week earlier. Thick brass, heavier than I expected. There were 2, bundled together with a paper tag that simply read, front/other. I assumed other was for a shed or storage cupboard. It didn't matter. I'd come to work. The translation deadline had crept up faster than expected, and I was behind. A remote place with bad reception, and no interruption seemed perfect. The lock on the front door took some coaxing. Old style, deep keyhole, stiff turning. Inside, the air was dry and still, like a room that hadn't been entered in years. Not musty, just untouched. I stood in the entry for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The cottage had only 3 rooms. A sitting area with a small hearth, a narrow kitchen with a rusted tap, and a bedroom off the back. No radio. No television. Just a shelf of dusty books, a single armchair, and the soft groan of wind pressing at the window panes. The second key didn't fit anything I tried. Not the back door, not the small cabinet near the hearth. I set it on the counter, intending to leave it there. That evening, I unpacked my notebooks and laid them out on the desk facing the sea. Not that there was much to see. Fog had rolled in some time after 4, thick and unmoving. It clung to the windows, diffusing the fading light into a pale, directionless glow. I made tea, boiled water twice. The first kettle smelled faintly metallic. The floor creaked more than expected, especially near the front door. I tested the hinges. Nothing loose, just old wood reacting to life again. By nightfall, the fog had pressed in closer. The porch light didn't reach past the first step. I kept the curtains drawn. Sleep came late. The sheets were cold but clean. I read until the words blurred, then turned off the lamp. The silence was dense, not peaceful, but crowded, like something waiting just out of range. I told myself it was just the sea. You don't realize how much sound a city gives you until it's gone. Somewhere in the night, I heard a knock. 2, actually. One soft tap, like knuckles on wood, followed by another, slightly louder. Not hurried, not insistent, just precise. I sat up listening. Nothing else. I checked the time. 2:42 a.m. I didn't get up, just lay back down, telling myself it was the wind. Old houses do things. Still, I listened longer than I should have. The next morning, I found the second key on the windowsill. I hadn't moved it. I was certain. It didn't make sense. I lived alone. I'd locked the door. Still, there it sat, catching the morning light. A faint dampness clung to it, like sea spray. I picked it up. The metal was warm. Not just room temperature warm, as if it had been held recently. I checked the house again. Every cabinet. The crawl space under the bed. Even the tiny cellar hatch in the kitchen floor. None of them had locks. None of them matched the second key. I went for a walk to clear my head. The road into town was uneven and mostly empty, lined with fence posts that leaned at strange angles. I passed no one, only the postman, turning up in a yellow van as I neared the shop. He was older, maybe late 60s, with a wind-reddened face and careful eyes. "You're staying up at the Cliff House?" he asked, handing me a bundle of unmarked mail, all blank envelopes. I nodded, bit isolated, always has been. I hesitated. There were 2 keys. One doesn't fit anything. His face shifted slightly. "Only one door locks from both sides," he said. I must have looked puzzled, because he added, "They always include the other one, some sort of formality. Best not to worry about it." I nodded and didn't press. That night, I dreamt of locks. Not doors, but smaller, like those on old diaries or trunks. In the dream, I held the second key and it fit something. I never saw what. Only the sound it made turning, a hollow, metallic click that echoed too long. When I woke, the key was in my hand. I sat up slowly, the blanket pulled tight around me. The bedroom was silent, still dark. I checked the bedside table, where I'd left the key the night before. Empty. I placed it back there and wrapped it in a cloth napkin. Later, I taped it inside a drawer. Over the next 2 days, the knocking returned. Always 2 taps. Sometimes from the front. Sometimes from within the walls. Never forceful. Just aware. My notebooks began to show lines I hadn't written. Small pencil marks. Translations out of order. Margins filled with my own handwriting and phrases I didn't remember choosing. One page of the word circled twice. Unlocked. The fog never lifted. Not once. I started hearing the sea more clearly. The tide moved as always did, but the sound grew sharper, louder, at times. I could swear it was closer than it should have been, as if the cliff had drawn inward. On the 4th night, I woke at the front door. I don't know how I got there. I was standing in the entryway, barefoot, heart pounding, with the second key already in the lock, not turning it, just resting there. The door was closed. I backed away slowly, key still in hand, and didn't sleep again. I began locking the bedroom door at night. It felt childish, but the gesture gave me a thread of control, however thin. The lock was barely functional, old brass with a soft catch, but it clicked into place, and that was enough. I moved the desk in front of it too, just in case. I told myself it was about wind or creaking or dreams, nothing more, but I didn't believe it. Each morning, I'd find some small thing out of place. A curtain pulled open when I was sure I'd left it drawn. A glass on the counter, half full with water I hadn't poured. The kettle moved, slightly left. Always minor, always deniable. I tried to focus on my work. I stayed indoors. I listened to see and ignored the second key, still wrapped and hidden in the drawer. But at night, I felt watched. Not constantly, not even directly. Just an awareness, like walking past a mirror in a dark room and catching something in the edge of your eye, not a reflection, a delay. That week, the fog became thicker. It no longer rolled in or out. It stayed. By mid-afternoon, it swallowed the house completely. From my desk, I could see only the vague outline of the porch rail. The weather vane spun slowly, though no wind moved the branches. I tried not to look at it too often. Something about its rhythm was off, unsettling in a way I couldn't define. The postman didn't return. The mail still came, but the bundle was always on the ground now, tied with twine, placed at the edge of the path, never closer. No postmarks, no writing, just sealed envelopes, empty when opened. I stopped checking after the fifth one. I began hearing the knocking more clearly. It happened after midnight, usually around the same time. 2 soft knocks, a pause, then another 2 from somewhere else. Sometimes near the kitchen cabinet, other times from under the floor. It never came from the same place twice. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, measured. Once I knocked back. I don't know why. I waited. Nothing answered. I felt foolish afterward, standing in my hallway in bare feet, holding a mug like a weapon. The next morning, the second key was outside the bedroom door, still wrapped, still warm. I didn't bring it back inside. I left it on the table. By that point, the house no longer felt like mine. I'd never truly settled into it. My books were stacked, not shelved. My suitcase still sat half-zipped in the corner. I hadn't unpacked the photos. I hadn't cooked. I only ever boiled water or made toast. The house was livable, but I wasn't living in it. I was staying. I started hearing the sea at odd times, not just through the windows, but through the walls, a slow, low rhythm, like waves against hollow wood. It came even when the wind was still, even when the tide chart said the water should have been at its lowest. Once, I pressed my ear to the floorboards and listened. There was a space beneath, too narrow for a crawl space, just an empty cavity between the floor and foundation, but it carried sound. And the sound it carried didn't always seem like water. It hummed, occasionally, not constant, but patterned, like someone humming under their breath. A melody I almost recognized but couldn't name. I slept less each night. Even when I managed an hour or 2, I woke disoriented. I once found the fridge open, light buzzing, a carton of milk left on the table, though I hadn't eaten. I didn't feel hunger, just restlessness. I read the same passage in my notebook 3 times before I realized the handwriting wasn't mine. It was my pen, my journal. But the words, they weren't familiar. One line read, "Don't open the door again. Not this time." I tore the page out and burned it in the sink. The cottage began to resist me. That was the only word I could find. Drawer stuck. The window in the bedroom jammed, shut one morning and never opened again. The front door took longer and longer to unlock. Once, the knob wouldn't turn at all. I had to wait for over an hour before it finally gave way, as if the mechanism had to decide it was time. The porch light went out. The replacement bulb sparked and died within minutes. I left it alone after that. Then came the dream. In it, I was in the hallway, holding the second key. The floor felt slanted, as though the house was tilting gently toward the sea. I walked to a door I didn't recognize, plain, narrow, made of unfinished wood. It had no frame, just a blank wall surrounding it. I placed the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. When I woke, I was in bed. The wrapped key was gone from the table. I found it later in the coat pocket I hadn't worn since my first day here. The wrapping was gone. I began taping the key to the inside of the drawer. Then I moved it to a glass jar, sealed and buried under a pile of books. I stopped using the bedroom, slept in the armchair with the fire burning low and my shoes on, just in case. The knocking didn't stop. It only changed location. One night it came from inside the fireplace. Another from the ceiling beams. Always 2 taps. A pause. Then 2 more, like someone trying to remember how to announce themselves. I called no one. There was no one to call. I tried leaving once, packed a bag, locked the door behind me, and started down the lane. The fog was worse than ever. The fence posts were different, spaced wrong. Some bent forward, others facing the house. I walked for what felt like an hour and found myself back where I'd started, though I hadn't turned around. The door was open, not wide, just enough. I went inside. The key was back on the counter. That night, the knocking started before midnight. 2 taps, silence, then a click. Somewhere deep within the house, a latch released, and something began to move. I stopped trying to leave after that night. The latch, whatever it clicked open, was never found. I searched every wall, every floorboard, ran my hands along the seams of cupboards and panels. Nothing had moved. Nothing appeared new or ajar. Still, something had shifted, not in space, but in the air, the way it carried sound, the way silence held its breath longer than it used to. The house began to feel larger than before. It made no sense. The layout was unchanged, yet the shadows stretched further. The hallway seemed to take longer to cross. The bedroom, though I no longer slept in it, drew colder, as if absorbing heat rather than losing it. I kept the door shut, but sometimes I found it open again in the morning, just enough to see the edge of the bed. The second key remained on the table. I had stopped hiding it. It didn't matter. Wherever I put it, it returned. Wrapped or not, sealed or not, it always reappeared. Not maliciously, not dramatically. Just there, like something politely reminding me it hadn't gone away. I didn't touch it again. But I started to wonder if that was even my choice anymore. The weather held steady. Same blank sky. Same thick fog. The sea no longer crashed. It pulsed. A steady rhythm, soft but insistent. I once counted the seconds between waves and found the interval repeated every 7 beats. Always 7. I lost track of what day it was. Time passed, but not evenly. Some hours stretched endlessly. Others vanished while I blinked. The clocks didn't help. The one in the kitchen stopped completely. The small travel alarm I had brought ran fast, gaining 10 minutes every day. I reset it twice before giving up. I tried writing once. Not translation, just notes. To myself, a way of recording what was happening. But every time I returned to the notebook, the pages were blank. Not erased, just clean. Even the ink that should have bled through the paper wasn't there. The weight of the pen had been real. The motion had happened, but the words never stayed. The knocking changed again. Still pairs. Still from different directions. But now, they came closer together. Less pause between sets. And sometimes they didn't stop at 2. One night I counted 6. Then 4. Then none. A pattern I couldn't decode. The rhythm mirrored the sea. That realization came slowly. I stood in the hallway one night, listening. The floor creaked beneath me, not from movement, but in reaction, like something adjusting, responding. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the second key. It sat perfectly still on the wooden table, not menacing, not inviting, just patient. At some point, I began hearing the hum again, this time not beneath the floor, but from the walls themselves, like old pipes carrying a tune remembered poorly. Not a melody, but a tone, rising and falling without purpose, almost like breath. The next morning, the fog had thinned. Not cleared, just loosened. I could see further down the path than before, enough to notice that the fence posts had changed again. Now they formed a curve instead of a line, bending gently inward, as if the path wasn't leading away anymore, but circling. I stood outside for a while, unsure why I didn't keep walking. The sea wasn't visible, only its sound remained, and even that seemed to echo from the wrong direction. I turned back to the house and saw the back door open. I didn't remember unlocking it. It was always locked. It had no keyhole, no knob on the outside, just a bolt from within. Yet it stood open, not wide, just enough to suggest it hadn't been forced. The air that came through wasn't cold, but it felt unfamiliar, as though it had passed through a space not meant for living. I closed the door, but the bolt wouldn't catch. I pushed harder. Still nothing. The frame hadn't changed, but the mechanism no longer aligned, as if the door didn't belong to the same shape anymore. Eventually, I gave up. I sat at the table, the second key before me. I didn't pick it up, but I stopped pretending it was just a key. That night, the knocking began earlier, just past 10. This time, it came from inside the fireplace. 2 sharp taps, then one soft one, lower, like it had traveled through stone. I stayed still. Then it came again from the ceiling, then the floor, then the wall behind me. They weren't asking to come in anymore. They were already here. The next morning, the postman returned. He didn't approach, just waited by the gate, watching the house. I opened the door halfway. He didn't wave, didn't greet me. "You still have it?" he asked. I didn't answer. His gaze shifted as if to look through the house. "They don't knock because they're locked out," he said. "They knock to remind you they once belonged." I stepped back inside, closed the door. I didn't watch him leave. That afternoon, the second key turned. Not in a lock, not in my hand. It simply turned. I heard it, clean and precise. Metal against metal, somewhere within the walls. I stood in the center of the room, waiting, but nothing came through. Not yet. I write this now because I need to leave some record, even if it won't stay on the page. Even if by tomorrow, these words vanish like the others. I keep thinking about the dream, about the door I'd never seen before, how easily the key turned, how natural it felt. I wonder if that door was ever mine to refuse. Tonight, I will sit in the chair again. The fire will burn low. The sea will hum beneath the floorboards. And when the key turns once more, because I won't move. I think that's what it wants. Not to open something, but to be remembered. Story 3. No one lives at number 12. The lights at number 12 come on every night at 6, but I've never seen anyone inside. I moved into number 10 in early October. A short let, 6 months, furnished. The sort of place meant to feel like a fresh start, one of those quiet, symmetrical cul-de-sacs where every lawn looks the same until you start paying attention. I like the stillness. After a few months in a flat above a kebab shop, the neat hedges and regular bin days were a kind of peace. It was a Wednesday when I first noticed number 12. Not because anything unusual happened, just the opposite. Nothing happened at all. The house sat between number 11 and the end of the row. Red brick, clean curtains, a tidy little path. But no car in the drive, no sound from within, no signs of life, yet not quite abandoned either. The porch light clicked on that evening as I locked up for a walk. Exactly 6 p.m. I checked my watch, thought nothing of it at the time, but then it did the same the next evening. And the one after that, no flicker, no delay. I asked Mrs. Cartwright at number 8 about it when I saw her raking leaves. "Number 12? She said, frowning. "No one's there. Hasn't been for years." I pointed out the bins, the grass, the lights. She shrugged. "Must be automatic, or someone the council sends round. It's none of my business." That was the end of it. I stopped asking. I work from home 2 days a week. The rest I spent commuting to the bank's branch office in the city. The job was quiet. Numbers don't argue. I like things that added up. But number 12 didn't. I began to watch it without meaning to. I'd glance out the window as I made coffee and see the front blinds still drawn at midday. I'd take the rubbish out and see the side gate closed, though the wind had blown everyone else's open. And then there was the mail. A small, white envelope appeared in my box the following Tuesday. No stamp, just my address, number 10, printed in block letters. Inside was a letter addressed to Mr. Edward Gray, number 12, handwritten, slanted with spidery loops. The paper smelled faintly of damp stone. It was short, just a few lines. I know you're still there. You don't have to pretend anymore. There was no return address. I checked with the postman the next morning. He shook his head. I didn't put anything like that in, he said, already moving on. When my son visited that weekend, I didn't mention the house. He was 9, quiet, thoughtful like his mother. We played cards, made pancakes, watched a film. He liked the cul-de-sac, said it was peaceful. At one point, he stood at the front window, squinting toward number 12. Is someone sick there? He asked. What do you mean? They keep the curtains shut all the time. I told him probably no one lived there. He nodded once. Then, almost as an afterthought, it looks like someone's watching from upstairs. I looked. Nothing there. Just a drawn curtain, perfectly still. The following week, another letter came. Again inside my box. Again addressed to number 12. Again unmarked. This one read, he remembers the attic. That's where it starts. I held the letter for a long time before burning it over the sink. One evening, just after dinner, I walked past number 12. There was no reason. I wasn't out to investigate. I just needed air. The porch light flicked on as I stepped onto the path. Not motion sensor, quick. Timed. Programmed. It cast a pale orange glow that didn't quite reach the ground. I stood at the bottom step. From here, the windows looked darker than the rest of the street. Not from dirt or tint, just depth, as if they led somewhere further than they should. The mailbox was empty. The lock was clean. The doormat read welcome, though the fibers were worn almost flat. I lifted my hand, hesitated, then knocked. No sound inside. No movement. Just silence thick enough to feel. I stepped back and left. The next morning, I found a drawing on the kitchen table. My son's. It showed a house with red brick, closed curtains, and something scribbled in the attic window. A black smudge with eyes. Just eyes. Too many for the size. He hadn't brought paper with him that weekend. He hadn't used pens or markers. The drawing wasn't there the night before. I called him. Did you leave something at Dad's? I asked casually. A pause. Then he told me to. Who did? Another pause. The boy in the attic. I didn't sleep much after that, but I kept telling myself it was nothing. Kids imagine things. People make up stories. Empty houses feel strange because they're supposed to. And yet, every evening, at exactly 6, the light came on. Every week, a letter appeared. And every day, number 12 waited. Not empty, just paused. The third letter arrived on a Thursday. Same envelope. No stamp. No markings on the back. Just my address typed neatly, again in that too-even font that looked like it came from a machine that had been forgotten by time. Inside, the same narrow, off-white paper. A single line. Stop asking questions. It notices. I hadn't said anything to anyone. Hadn't called the council again. Hadn't gone back to the porch. But somehow that line knew. It had the weight of accusation, but the tone of warning. Not threatening. Not even angry. Just aware. I stood at the kitchen sink, the letter dangling from 2 fingers, steam rising from my untouched tea. My phone sat beside the kettle. I didn't reach for it. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew what would happen if I tried to explain. It would sound absurd. Worse, it would sound wrong. Like I'd missed something obvious, something critical, and was now chasing shadows of my own design. I folded the paper, slid it into the drawer beneath the cutlery, and closed it gently. That night, I heard footsteps. Not outside, not overhead. Next door, number 12. At first, it was nothing but a soft creak, the kind a house makes when it settles. But it came again, and again, in rhythm, for slow paces. A pause. Then 3 more. across floorboards. Measured. I turned off the television. The sound didn't stop. I moved to the window. The porch light was on. Curtains drawn. Darkness behind glass. Then the unmistakable scrape of a chair being moved across the floor. I stepped back. It didn't happen again. The next morning, I found something in my post box that wasn't mail. A key. Old. Iron. Ridged. Not to a modern lock. Too thin to be for a car. No tag. No note. Just resting at the bottom of the box like it had been dropped or left. I stood for a long while on the step with the key in my palm. It felt heavier than it should have. Not in weight, but in implication. I didn't bring it inside. I placed it under the small stone frog in the garden bed and left it there. By lunchtime, it was gone. My son came again that weekend. I tried to keep things normal, movies, pancakes, board games. But he was quieter this time, distant. He watched the window more than he watched the screen. On Sunday morning, as I made tea, I found another drawing on the table. This time it wasn't just number 12. It was the inside. A narrow hallway. A staircase with no railing, walls too tall, and the attic door, drawn in heavy pencil, over and over until the paper buckled. I called to him gently. "Did you make this?" He nodded. "Have you been in that house?" He looked at me without blinking. "No," but he showed me. "Who?" "The boy with the long arms." I didn't ask again. That night, I dreamed of the hallway. It was darker than in the drawing, narrower. But I recognized it. I walked through it slowly, feeling the grain of the wall beneath my fingers. The floorboards bent with my steps, but didn't break. A door waited at the end. The attic, I knew instinctively. Slightly ajar, I reached for the handle, then woke up, standing in my kitchen barefoot, one hand on the doorknob leading outside. It was 5:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the porch light at number 12 turned off. I began noticing other things. The neighbors avoided the house more than they admitted. Their cars never parked in front of it. Kids rode their bikes in loops around the rest of the cul-de-sac, but never stopped near number 12. I watched Mrs. Cartwright glance at it once while gardening. She muttered something and immediately went inside. The dog at number 9 used to bark at everything, squirrels, birds, car doors. But it never barked at number 12. Not once. The next letter was different. Same envelope, same placement in my box. But the paper inside had no writing, just a drawing, a staircase, leading down. Beneath it, shadows, long, thin, reaching up. I burned that one, but I kept the ashes. Some nights I'd hear the sounds again, the soft footfalls, the low creak of something leaning against the wall. Once, I heard a slow, dragging noise, like fabric being pulled across wood. I didn't look. I kept the television off, slept in the chair, drank too much coffee, and pretended the world made sense. It was easier that way. Then one morning, I opened my front door and found a package, brown paper, no return address. Inside, a small photo frame, face down. I didn't want to turn it over, but I did. It was number 12, the same house, but old. The colors faded, the trees smaller. A boy stood in front of the porch, pale, expression unreadable, thin arms at his sides. Behind him, in the attic window, a shape. It was too blurred to make out. But the eyes! I swear they were watching me, not the camera. I put the photo in a drawer, tried to forget, but I dream of the staircase now, not the attic, down, somewhere deeper. And each night, I wake a minute closer to 6. It was raining the night I stepped through the door at number 12. Not hard, just a slow, needling drizzle that slicked the pavement and collected at the edges of the porch light. 6 p.m., right on time. The bulb above the door blinked to life, casting its amber haze over the brickwork. I hadn't planned to go in. I hadn't made a decision at all. I was holding my post, the usual junk flyers and bank statement, and the door was simply open, not wide, just enough to suggest the latch hadn't caught. I stood there for a moment with the rain gently soaking into the shoulders of my coat. It didn't feel like a threshold. It felt like an invitation. I stepped inside. The hallway was narrower than I expected. The carpet, once beige, was worn to a dull gray-brown path along the center. There was no sound, no ticking clock, no hum of appliances, no creaking. Even the rain, which should have tapped at the windows, had gone silent the moment I crossed the threshold. I closed the door gently behind me, not to trap myself in, just to see what would happen. The interior smelled faintly of dry paper and something older, something like stone left too long in the damp. The walls were bare. No photos, no artwork, just off-white paint stained near the floorboards. To my left, a living room, couch, armchair, unlit lamp, a small table stacked neatly with books that didn't have titles on the spines. All blank. I didn't touch anything. Straight ahead, a staircase, narrow, steeper than most. The banister was polished smooth, not by care, but by time and repetition. Too smooth. I put one hand on the railing and froze. There were footsteps above. Soft, careful. One step, then two, then nothing. I called out quietly, "Hello." It sounded wrong. Not like my voice didn't belong, but as if it had landed somewhere it shouldn't have. No answer. I moved up the stairs slowly, hand trailing the banister. At the top, a short hallway with 3 doors. One to the left, one straight ahead, one just slightly ajar to the right. The first 2 led to empty rooms. Bare floors, unmade beds, dust on every surface but no cobwebs, no insects, nothing living. The third door, the one slightly open, was the attic hatch. It wasn't like a normal attic door. There was no pull cord, no fold-down ladder, just a plain wooden hatch in the wall, set low, barely above eye level. A small iron keyhole sat in its center, and though I never tried the key again, the one I buried beneath the garden frog, the one that vanished, I knew that was where it belonged. The wood around the keyhole was worn, scratched, as if it had been opened many times, and closed even more. Behind me, the floor creaked, not loudly, just enough. I turned quickly. Nothing there, no shadow, no draft, no breath. But I knew I wasn't alone. Not entirely. I left the house quietly. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stood on the porch under the failing light, soaked through and suddenly aware of how cold my fingers had become. Inside, the hallway had been still, but I couldn't shake the sense that something had moved the moment I turned away, that it always moved when no one was watching. The letters stopped after that. No more envelopes. No more typed warnings. No more drawings. But the dreams began again. Always the hallway. Always the attic. Sometimes I opened the hatch. Sometimes it opened itself. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined most of it, that my mind, frayed by months of solitude and sleep loss, had constructed something out of ordinary things, that my son's drawings were coincidence, that the photos, the voices, the sound of chairs scraping across wooden floors, all of it could be explained. But then one night, I found my son standing at the window in his pajamas, hours after he should have been asleep. I asked what he was doing. He didn't turn. "He's waving again." He said quietly, "Who?" "The boy in number 12. I walked to the window. The porch light was on. The door was shut. But the attic window, the one I'd never seen open, was cracked just slightly. And behind it, a shadow moved. I moved out the next week. The landlord didn't ask why, just forwarded my mail and kept a deposit. Number 10 is still there. I pass by sometimes when I visit my son. Number 12 hasn't changed. The curtains remain closed. The porch light comes on at 6. The mailbox stays empty now, but the window upstairs, sometimes it's open, just a little. People forget that houses don't die. They wait. They remember, and some doors, even when closed, were never meant to be locked.